This Christmas, Santa isn't bringing gifts. He's bringing terror.
The town was quiet that Christmas Eve, the kind of quiet that felt heavier than snow. Streets were blanketed in white, roofs sagged under the weight, and the only sound was the soft whisper of flakes brushing against each other. Inside her small room, Mia pressed her nose against the frosted window, watching the world outside with wide, curious eyes. Something was different this year. The streets were empty, no carolers, no laughter, just the soft crunch of snow under invisible footsteps. Mia tilted her head. Footprints appeared in the snow, leading toward her house, but they were strange, enormous, uneven, as though made by a man who wasn't quite human. Her mother called from downstairs, her voice warm and familiar. "Mia, time for bed." But Mia couldn't move. A chill ran down her spine as she watched the footprints stop just outside her window, perfectly still. And then, in the faint glow of the street lamp, she saw it, a figure in red, standing among the falling snow. It looked like Santa. Everyone's Santa. But its eyes, they glowed faintly black, piercing the night. Its smile stretched too wide, too sharp. And the sack it carried wriggled, as if something inside wanted to escape. Mia's fingers tightened against the cold glass. She wanted to look away, wanted to tell herself it was just a shadow, just a trick of the snow. But she couldn't. Something was watching her. Waiting. And she knew, deep down, that this Christmas would be nothing like the ones before. Outside, the snow continued to fall silently, hiding what was coming. Mia's heart pounded in her chest like a drum, each beat louder than the last. She pressed herself closer to the window, eyes locked on the figure in the street lamp's dim glow. The snow swirled around him, clinging to his red suit, but there was something unnatural about the way it fell. It almost seemed to avoid him, drifting around like he existed in a space separate from the world. At first glance, he looked like the Santa from the stories, bright red coat, fluffy white trim, black boots dusted with snow. But the longer Mia looked, the more wrong it became. The red of his suit wasn't bright, it was deep, almost blood-like, and the fur trim seemed stained, gray in places, as if the cold had seeped into it. His boots were enormous, far larger than any man could wear, and they sank unnaturally deep into the snow without making a sound. And then there were his eyes. Mia's breath caught in her throat. They glowed faintly black, like two embers burning in the snow. They were alive, aware, searching. When they turned toward her window, she felt a weight press down on her chest, an icy fear that had nothing to do with the cold outside. Those eyes weren't jolly. They weren't playful. They were hungry. The sack he carried dragged along the ground, the fabric stretching and twisting as though it contained something alive. Every so often, it bulged, and Mia thought she saw little hands, or claws, pressing against the inside, desperate to escape. She swallowed hard, her fingers trembling against the frost-covered windowpane. A shadow moved across the wall of her house. Not the Santa's shadow, something else, darker, shifting unnaturally. The snow whispered around it, and for a moment, Mia thought she heard soft laughter, not the jolly ho-ho-ho of the Santa she knew, but a dry, broken sound that scraped against her mind. Her mother's voice downstairs broke the spell, warm and familiar. "Mia, come to bed." Mia wanted to answer, wanted to run downstairs and hide under the covers, but her legs felt frozen, her body trapped in the icy weight of terror. The figure shifted, taking a slow, deliberate step toward the house. Mia's eyes widened in horror as she noticed the footprints, huge, misshapen, and stopping at the edge of the snowbank, but the snow beneath them wasn't pressed down. It was as if he hovered slightly above it, moving without leaving a true mark. Then, he raised one gloved hand slowly, deliberately, pointing toward her window. The snow around it melted in a small circle, though it was freezing outside. And in that moment, Mia understood something terrible. This was no Santa delivering gifts. This was something that hunted children, and tonight, it had chosen her. The figure crouched slightly, dragging the sack behind him. The sound it made was wet, almost like fabric rubbing against flesh, and Mia's stomach turned. Something inside it moaned softly, a pitiful, desperate sound that made her want to scream, and yet, she couldn't. The air itself seemed to thicken, pressing against her throat. Mia stumbled backward, her hand brushing against the wall of her room. She wanted to shut the curtains, to hide from the glowing eyes and that twisted smile, but fear rooted her in place. Every instinct told her to move, but every nerve in her body was paralyzed. And then, as if sensing her hesitation, the figure straightened. The sack twitched violently, and a single, tiny hand pressed against the fabric, clawing at the red coat like it was trying to escape. Mia gasped and stumbled back further. The Santa stepped forward again. The snow swirled unnaturally around him, forming shapes that resembled screaming faces for a heartbeat before dissolving into the white night. His boots made no sound, yet the pressure of his presence pressed against her ears, filling her with the rhythmic thud of her own terrified heartbeat. For the first time, the figure spoke. His voice was low, hollow, like the wind through a long-abandoned graveyard. "Little girl? I see you. So curious, so trusting, tonight, you've been noticed." Mia's mouth opened to scream, but no sound came out. Her body shook violently as the figure's head tilted slightly, studying her with those black, burning eyes. The sack shifted again, and a wet, scraping sound came from inside, accompanied by tiny, frantic cries. Then, just as suddenly as he appeared, the figure turned and began moving along the edge of the house, circling toward the back. He paused at each corner, peering around with those hollow, glowing eyes, as if he knew she was watching. And then, he stopped directly in front of her window. Mia felt a chill that wasn't from the snow. It crept up her spine, sinking into her bones. The figure raised a finger, tapping it softly against the glass, leaving a dark smear that looked almost like blood. And his whisper cut through the silence like a knife. "I know you're awake, don't hide. I always find them." The snow swirled harder, and when Mia blinked, he was gone. But the footprints, they remained. And the faint, wet dragging sound of that sack echoed in the night. Mia backed away from the window, shivering uncontrollably. She could hear the faint whispers of something moving outside, something that didn't belong to the world she knew. She knew that this Christmas Eve was the beginning of a nightmare, one she might not survive. The town slept, or at least it seemed to. Inside the warm glow of homes, children dreamed of sugar plums, of presents, of laughter and light. But not all dreams were sweet that night. Some were about shadows that moved on their own, about cold eyes staring from corners, about whispers that promised something terrible. Mia, still trembling from her encounter at the window, had been pulled from her bed by a force she didn't understand. Her father's voice had called to her again, but she ignored it, slipping silently into the hallway. The house felt wrong. The usual creaks and groans of settling wood had turned into soft, deliberate movements, like someone, or something, was pacing just beyond her sight. Downstairs, the Christmas tree stood tall, ornaments glittering in the flickering firelight. Stockings hung along the mantel, stuffed with candy and small toys, each labeled carefully with names. But something had changed. The first sign of the horror came in a soft, almost polite movement. One by one, the stockings quivered as if touched by invisible hands. Mia's eyes widened. She knew she wasn't imagining it. Slowly, the stockings began to empty themselves, not spilling candy or toys, but vanishing, sucked away as though the air itself had devoured them. When the last stocking went silent, a chill ran through the room, freezing the fire in the hearth. And then, Mia noticed the small notes left behind, crisp and white against the dark wood. Her name was written on one, the letters sharp and precise, almost carved rather than drawn. "I've checked my list. And I've chosen you." Mia's fingers trembled as she picked up the note. The paper felt unusually cold, almost wet, like frost that had formed inside the house. She wanted to tear it, throw it into the fire, but some invisible force kept it in her hand. The words burned in her mind. "Chosen, you." Curiosity and fear warred inside her. She knew that this was not the Santa from the stories. That jolly, round man with rosy cheeks and a booming laugh did not leave notes like this. This was something else. Something that took delight in fear, in silence, in watching children with glimmering black eyes and impossible patience. The town itself had begun to change, though no one noticed it yet. Other children's stockings had emptied too. Across the streets, faint whispers floated on the wind, carried over the snow, but muffled just enough that only those who were listening closely could hear. Tiny, frantic noises, like someone crying softly but trying not to be heard. Mia crept to the window, peering into the darkness beyond. The footprints had multiplied, snaking across rooftops and down alleyways, stopping at each house. The snow beneath them remained unnaturally untouched, as if the figure's weight did not belong to this world. And yet, for each house he visited, a note appeared, sometimes tucked neatly into a doorframe, sometimes left inside a stocking, always the same message. "I've checked my list. And I've chosen you." The air in Mia's home felt heavier, pressing against her chest. Every shadow seemed to stretch toward her, elongating unnaturally. The house groaned, not with age, but with anticipation. She could hear faint scratching, soft footsteps echoing in rooms she had just passed, and through it all, the whispers grew louder, forming words she could almost understand. She ran back to the fireplace, seeking some kind of sanctuary. The flames flickered wildly, casting dancing shadows that seemed to mimic the figure outside. Her gaze fell on the sack. No, not the sack, but the dark stain left on the snow by the last movement outside. She felt it in her chest, a sense of inevitability. This Santa did not bring gifts. He collected. He hunted. And tonight, the list was growing, one name at a time. Mia tried to shake off the fear, telling herself she was imagining it all. Maybe the snow had created strange shapes. Maybe it was the wind. Maybe she could hide and everything would pass. But even as she thought this, she felt eyes on her, those burning black eyes, piercing through the walls, through the window, through her very bones. The soft sound of the sack dragging across the snow came again, closer this time. She pressed herself against the wall, holding her breath. The whispers grew more distinct, forming a chorus of lost, desperate voices. "Help us, don't let him take you, don't let him choose you." Mia's heart raced. She wanted to scream, to wake her parents, to run to the door, but all her muscles felt frozen. She knew instinctively that moving would draw attention. And then, the room went completely silent. The fire dimmed, shadows thickened, and the only sound was her own terrified heartbeat echoing in her ears. A cold wind swept through the house. The curtains fluttered, revealing the street outside. And there, standing in the snow, just at the edge of the street lamp circle, was the figure again. He was perfectly still, watching. The sack was at his side, writhing softly, a faint, wet sound like something inside was struggling. His black eyes glimmered like dying embers, and he raised a gloved finger, pointing directly toward the window. Mia's mouth went dry. The whispers in the wind became almost intelligible. "Tonight, it is your turn." And in that moment, she understood. Christmas Eve was no longer about gifts or joy. It was about surviving the red figure who hunted silently in the snow, checking his list, and taking what he wanted. Mia backed away from the window, her hands shaking violently, her mind racing. The notes, the empty stockings, the whispers, they were all warnings. She knew the figure was coming for her next. And outside, in the snow that had once seemed so peaceful, the footprints moved again. The house had grown colder. Not just the kind of cold that comes from winter snow seeping through the walls, but a bone-deep chill that settled into Mia's chest, wrapping around her ribs like icy chains. She pulled her arms around herself, shivering violently. Every shadow in the room seemed to stretch, reaching toward her, and every small creak of the floorboards sounded louder than a shout. She tried to tell herself it was just her imagination. The stockings were gone, the notes were gone, perhaps it had been a dream. But when she approached the fireplace, her eyes widened in terror. The hearth was empty of fire. The logs lay untouched, as if they had never been lit. And from deep within the chimney, a soft, rasping whisper drifted up, curling around the walls like smoke. Mia froze. She could hear it clearly now, though no one else could. Little girl, so curious, so quiet. Her breath caught. The whisper was almost playful, but there was an undercurrent to it, a menace that made her stomach turn. She wanted to run, wanted to flee the house entirely, but she realized with horror that the front door was gone, vanished, replaced by smooth, unbroken wall. Every window was locked, frost sealing the edges. She was trapped. The whispering grew louder, more insistent. "Come closer. I see you. I know you're awake." Mia felt the hairs on her neck stand on end. The sound seemed to be coming not just from the fireplace, but from all around her. The walls breathed with it. The floorboards pulsed with it. And then, she heard it, the sack. It scraped against the tiles of the fireplace, dragging softly, wetly. A muffled whimper escaped, tiny and pitiful. Mia's stomach knotted. She realized with horror that it was the sound of children, trapped, terrified, calling for help that would never come. The whispering changed, became words that cut through her like broken glass. "I've been watching. I've been waiting, and now you are mine." Mia's eyes darted around the room, looking for anything she could use to defend herself. The fireplace stretched taller, its opening growing like a black mouth in the wall. The shadows inside twisted, taking shape. She saw faint outlines, tiny, pale hands pushing against the edges, wriggling, clawing for freedom. She gagged at the realization, those were the children from the sack. The ones who had been taken before. Suddenly, the chimney shifted. A dark, clawed hand slipped from the top, followed by a small head, pale and glistening in the firelight, or rather, the lack of firelight. The child's eyes were wide, empty, filled with panic. And behind them, a whispering laugh, low and cruel, echoed from somewhere deep within the bricks. "You will join them, tonight." Mia stumbled backward. The floor trembled slightly, like the house itself was breathing. The whispers grew louder, repeating in chorus, overlapping into a maddening cacophony. Chosen, chosen, chosen. The sack's scraping intensified. It rose, sliding down the chimney like it had a mind of its own, landing on the hearth with a wet, sickening thud. The small voices inside cried out together, pleading. Mia pressed her hands over her ears, but it did no good. The sound invaded her mind, burrowing into her skull, promising death, promising capture, promising that she could never leave this night alive. Then, from the darkness of the hearth, a figure emerged. Not fully, just a shadow of red and black, but enough. The boots, impossibly large, touched the ground silently. The coat shimmered like it had been dipped in blood. And the black eyes? Mia couldn't look away. I've been waiting for you, the figure rasped, the voice hollow yet everywhere, filling the room. So curious, so brave, yet so foolish. Mia stumbled backward again. She hit the wall and fell to the floor, her eyes never leaving the darkness of the fireplace. The sack squirmed, bulging with movement, and one small hand emerged, grasping desperately for her. She felt tears sting her eyes as the whispers merged into one deafening roar. Come, join us, join us, join us. The figure leaned closer, its face still shrouded in shadow, and Mia could feel the heat, or was it cold, radiating from it. The air itself pressed against her skin, heavy, suffocating, impossibly thick. She understood, with horrifying clarity, that the chimney was no longer just a fireplace. It was a doorway, a gateway, a path that would swallow her whole. Mia scrambled to her feet, her mind racing. She had to escape, somewhere, anywhere. But every step she took, the whispers followed. Every heartbeat echoed in the room, loud and mocking. And the sack kept moving closer, dragging itself across the floor, the children inside writhing, their muffled cries piercing the silence like knives. The figure stepped fully into the room, filling the space with its monstrous presence. Black eyes glowed, scanning, calculating. And then, just as Mia thought she could not move another inch, it spoke again, softer this time, as if leaning into her mind itself. Tonight, you will understand, the list, it grows. And in that instant, the wall seemed to pulse, the shadows reached toward her, and the fireless hearth became a black hole of darkness, whispering, alive, hungry. Mia's terror reached its peak. She wanted to scream, to run, to vanish, but the figure's attention was locked on her. And the whispers, the endless, maddening whispers, promised that escape was impossible. The red figure was in her home. And it would not leave without taking its prize. Mia's chest heaved as she backed away from the fireplace, her small hands scraping against the cold, unforgiving walls. The red figure had fully entered the room now. Its massive boots pressed down on the floor silently, yet Mia could feel each step vibrating through her bones, a terrible rhythm matching her own terrified heartbeat. The sack behind it writhed violently, small cries and scratching sounds escaping with every movement. She spun toward the staircase, desperate to reach the safety of her bedroom, or at least somewhere she could barricade herself. But the figure moved faster than she expected. Without warning, it lunged forward, its long, clawed hands reaching out. Mia barely dodged, stumbling into the hall. The wall seemed to pulse with shadow, stretching and twisting as if the house itself were alive, aiding the red figure in her capture. Her footsteps pounded against the wooden floors, but they made no sound. That was the worst part. It was as if the house had swallowed her cries, her panic, leaving only the echo of the creature's whispered laughter trailing behind her. So fast, so foolish, but you cannot hide. Mia ran down the hallway, glancing desperately at each door she passed. They were all locked. Her father's study, the pantry, even the front door, barred by some invisible force she could not comprehend. Every exit led to another hall, another dead end, as though the house itself had been twisted into a trap. Then came the sounds of the sack. It dragged itself along the floor, wet and squelching, bulging as if something inside it was pushing outward. Tiny, desperate hands thrashed against the fabric, reaching, clawing for freedom. The children inside were crying, screaming, begging for help, but Mia could do nothing. She turned into the living room, hoping to find a closet or a piece of furniture to hide behind. Shadows leapt from the corners, coiling around the edges of her vision. The red figure's eyes glimmered at every reflection, every mirrored surface. It was everywhere at once. Its whispering followed her. I've seen you, always watching, always waiting, tonight, you run, but for how long? Mia's mind raced. She needed a plan, anything. She darted into the kitchen, throwing open cabinets and pulling down pots and pans, trying to create obstacles, trying to slow it down. The figure paused at the threshold, black eyes scanning the room, the sack writhing hungrily behind it. Then it advanced, a slow, terrifying step, and the air itself seemed to constrict around Mia, pressing against her lungs. She grabbed a knife from the counter, shaking violently as she brandished it. It felt useless, a small barrier against something that defied nature. The red figure tilted its head, and for the first time, Mia thought she saw amusement flicker in its black eyes. It didn't need the knife. It needed only patience. It had all the time in the world. The chase continued through the house, a twisted game of predator and prey. Mia ran through the dining room, knocking over chairs and silverware, the clatter swallowed by the unnatural silence. She darted into the hallway and up the stairs, the wooden boards creaking beneath her. Behind her, the figure followed, silent yet relentless. When she reached her bedroom, she slammed the door shut and pressed her back against it, listening. The sound of the sack dragging across the floor came again, slower now, deliberate, almost teasing. The whispers filled the room, soft at first, then louder, layered, almost chanting. Chosen, chosen, chosen. Mia's eyes darted around her room, searching for anything she could use. Her toys, her books, her bed, it was all useless. The shadows seemed to lengthen, crawling along the walls, stretching toward her. The red figure's voice seeped into her mind now, low and omnipresent. You cannot run, the list grows, the list always grows. She backed away from the door, only to find the window slightly ajar. A cold wind whispered through, carrying the scent of snow and something fouler beneath it. Could she jump? Could she escape into the night? But when she glanced outside, she froze. Footprints led up to the edge of the window, but they didn't stop there. They disappeared into the darkness, as if he could move through air, snow, and shadows alike. And then, the door shook violently. A low, guttural scraping sound accompanied it, like claws against wood. The sack moved closer, wet, writhing, and a tiny voice, a child's voice, cried out. Help, help me, don't let him take me. Mia realized with horror that there was no time to think. She had to move. She shoved open the window and climbed out, the bitter cold biting at her skin. Snow crunched under her feet as she ran, adrenaline pushing her forward. But with every step, she could hear it behind her, the silent, unstoppable rhythm of boots, the soft dragging of the sack, the whispers curling around her mind. The red figure was hunting. And tonight, the list was not yet complete. Mia ran through the snowy streets, her small legs trembling with exhaustion, but fear lent her unnatural speed. Each breath came in ragged gasps, forming clouds of mist in the freezing night. She didn't know where she was going, only that she had to keep moving. Behind her, the silence was deafening at first, but then the whispers returned, curling through the snow like tendrils of ice. Chosen, so curious, so trusting. Mia pressed herself against a lamppost, peering into the shadows. The street was empty, or at least it appeared empty. Footprints marred the pristine snow, huge, misshapen, and impossibly deep, but they didn't match any human stride. And there, in the distance, the faint glow of black eyes watched her from behind a cluster of evergreens. She stumbled backward, heart hammering. Memories of the empty stockings and the soft, wet dragging sound of the sack filled her mind. And then, through the whispers, she began to understand. This wasn't just a man, this wasn't just a legend, this was something ancient, something that had hunted children for decades. Mia's mind flashed to old news articles she had glimpsed on her parents' phones. Disappearances around Christmas, over the years, hundreds of children gone without a trace. People had whispered about strange sightings, a red-clad man with glowing eyes, but the authorities had always dismissed it. Legends. Folklore. Nothing real. But now Mia knew the horrifying truth, it was real. And it was coming for her. She ducked behind a parked car, shivering violently. Her eyes scanned the street, and there it was again, the sack. It wasn't lying still this time. The writhing movements were more frantic, the tiny hands inside pressing and clawing, the muffled cries louder, closer. Mia felt bile rise in her throat. The children trapped inside were still alive, still conscious, still suffering. A thought struck her, the red figure wasn't just hunting children. It collected them, feeding off their fear, taking them back to some dark, frozen place where they would be trapped forever. And the notes, the empty stockings, the whispers, they were all part of the ritual. Each year, it would choose, it would hunt, it would grow stronger. Mia realized with horror that she could see it now, the pattern in the disappearances, the stories whispered by frightened townsfolk. This Santa didn't make mistakes. It had always chosen its victims carefully, the curious, the brave, the careless. And now it had chosen her. The whispers shifted, forming coherent words, though no one else could hear them. The list grows, the list never ends, the children are mine. Mia felt her legs buckle, sliding down to the cold, snow-covered street. Tears stung her eyes as the weight of it all pressed down on her. The red figure didn't just kill, it claimed. And with each child taken, the legend grew stronger, feeding on fear and darkness. Suddenly, the shadow of the red figure loomed over her. The sack squirmed violently behind it, wet thuds against the snow echoing like drums of doom. Mia scrambled backward, trying to flee, but her foot caught on a hidden root, sending her sprawling. The snow beneath her hands was sticky, almost warm, and she recoiled. A muffled, desperate cry escaped the sack, as if it knew she was close to joining them. The figure leaned closer, black eyes boring into her soul. Its voice was low, almost tender, but underneath it was a deadly promise. I've waited for you, so long, and now, you understand, you cannot run. Mia tried to scream, but her voice froze in her throat. The whispers filled her mind, chanting, looping, relentless. She realized, with a shiver that went through her bones, that this was no ordinary Santa. This was something older, something that had always existed in the shadows of Christmas, feeding on innocence, taking what it wanted while the world celebrated. And then, she understood the cruelest truth of all. The red figure didn't just hunt for the sake of hunting. It needed the fear. It needed the terror. Each scream, each glance of panic, each desperate plea, it was fuel. And she had given it willingly by looking, by watching, by not believing the legends, until now. Mia forced herself to her feet, trembling violently. She could not let it end here. Not tonight. She didn't know how, but she had to survive. The whispers grew louder, forming a chorus that seemed to come from every direction at once. Chosen, 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 tonight, it is your turn. Her heart hammered, adrenaline burning through her veins. She looked around, searching for any escape. But every shadow seemed alive. Every tree branch reached toward her. Every footprint in the snow hinted at the red figure's omnipresence. And then she saw it, a small, abandoned shed at the edge of the street, its door slightly ajar. The snow around it was untouched, as if it was hidden, protected from the red figure's gaze. Mia's fingers clenched into fists. She didn't know if it would save her, but it was the only chance she had. As she sprinted toward the shed, she felt the cold brush of air behind her, the whispers, the sack, the figure itself. The red figure was patient, calculating, unstoppable. And now Mia understood the final truth. Running would only delay the inevitable. The hunt had begun. And the list would never end. Mia burst into the shed, slamming the door behind her with trembling hands. The wood groaned under the sudden impact, sending a shiver through her spine. For a moment, she thought she might be safe, just a moment. The shed was dark and cramped, but the faint moonlight filtering through cracks in the walls revealed dust-covered tools and crates, forgotten relics of a long-abandoned past. She pressed herself into a corner, chest heaving, eyes wide as she strained to hear anything outside. The snow had stopped falling, leaving an eerie stillness, as though the world itself was holding its breath. But the silence was broken by the unmistakable sound of the sack dragging itself across the snow. A wet, rhythmic squelch accompanied each movement, and muffled cries spilled out from within. Mia backed further into the shadows, realizing with a rising sense of dread that this shed was not an escape. It was just another stage. Then came the whispers. They seeped into the shed like smoke through cracks, curling around her ears, around her mind. So close, so small, chosen, tonight. Mia shook violently. She wanted to cover her ears, to shut out the voices, but they weren't just outside, they were inside her head now. She could hear the voices of the children trapped in the sack, faint but clear, crying, pleading, calling her name. The red figure was not just hunting her, it was drawing her into its world, pulling her across some invisible line she had not seen until now. A sound of splintering would make her freeze. One of the shed's walls seemed to shift, bending unnaturally, as if breathing. Shadows inside twisted into shapes, elongated arms, faceless heads, whispers forming into words she could almost understand. Step closer, join us, the threshold awaits. Mia's fingers grazed a small, rusted window. Through it, she could see the red figure standing just beyond the snow, still, impossibly tall. Its coat glimmered, as if wet, its black eyes locked on her. The sack lay at its side, writhing violently. And for the first time, she realized something terrifying. It didn't just hunt in the snow. It could manipulate the space around it. The boundaries of the world, the shed, the street, the night, were under its control. A chill swept through the room, so deep that Mia could feel it inside her bones. Her breath fogged the air in front of her face. The whispers grew louder, merging into a terrifying chorus. Step through, join the list, forever. And then the shed changed. The walls stretched, groaned, and warped around her. The floor beneath her hands felt slick, like frozen water. Shadows pooled at the corners, forming shapes that reached toward her. The threshold was no longer just the door she had come through, it was the entire space around her. The red figure had opened a doorway into its world. Mia's stomach churned with fear and disbelief. She could see faint outlines of past children, trapped in darkness beyond comprehension, their eyes hollow, their mouths moving in silent screams. They were suspended in the shadows, unable to move, unable to escape. And the sack wasn't just a sack anymore. It was a portal, a vessel connecting her to the horrors beyond. The red figure's voice slithered into her mind, low and omnipresent. You cannot resist, the threshold will claim you, you were always meant to come. Mia's legs trembled as she realized the horrifying truth. Stepping into the open space outside, or even trying to stay, meant crossing into a reality she could not survive. Every instinct screamed at her to flee, but her body felt frozen. The threshold was a trap. It was the gateway between the living world and the red figure's domain, a place where it held power over children and fear alike. She could feel it reaching for her, slowly, patiently. Its shadow stretched across the snow, across the shed, curling into the cracks in the walls. The whispers rose to a deafening crescendo. Step forward, or be claimed, forever. Mia forced herself to her feet. Adrenaline burned through her veins. She had to act, had to survive, but the path was unclear. The red figure was patient. It did not rush. It allowed terror to build, to tighten around her like a noose. Every heartbeat was a drumbeat for the hunt. Every breath drew her closer to the threshold. And then she saw it, a narrow beam of moonlight cutting across the floor, illuminating a small crack in the back wall of the shed. Maybe it was an exit. Maybe it was another trap. But it was her only chance. She took a deep breath, chest shaking, and ran toward it. The shadows reacted instantly. They twisted and lunged, claws scraping against her arms and legs. The whispers screamed, 1,000 voices overlapping. You cannot escape, the list grows, forever. Mia pushed forward, diving through the crack, stumbling into the cold snow outside. Her heart raced, lungs burning, and for a brief moment, she thought she was free. But the red figure was already there, looming above her, black eyes glimmering with hunger, the sack writhing violently at its side. The threshold had been crossed. Mia had survived the shed, but she was now fully in its world. And in that world, there was no escape. The red figure's voice echoed, carrying across the snow-covered street. Tonight, the list grows, and you will not be spared. Mia ran, knowing that survival meant more than speed, it meant cunning, courage, and the will to face the darkness she had glimpsed. But one thought burned in her mind above all others. She had crossed the threshold, and the hunt was only beginning. The snow bit at Mia's skin, but she barely felt it anymore. Adrenaline kept her moving, legs pumping, lungs burning with every desperate breath. She had crossed the threshold, but freedom still felt impossible. The red figure was everywhere and nowhere at once, its shadow stretching over the ground, curling around trees, merging with the darkness itself. The sack behind it writhed, each movement sending a wet, sickening sound echoing across the silent street. Mia stumbled, nearly falling, and then froze. There, just ahead, the red figure waited. Its enormous boots pressed into the snow, leaving footprints that glimmered with black frost. Its glowing eyes bore into hers, unwavering. The sack thrashed violently, tiny hands pressing against the fabric, desperate, frantic. The whispers rose again, deafening now, no longer gentle, no longer just voices, they were commands, pleading, screaming. Come, join us, the list, it grows. Mia gritted her teeth. She had to fight. There was no time for fear, no time for hesitation. She picked up a broken branch from the snow, shaking violently, and faced the figure. Her heart pounded, terror and courage colliding in her chest. The red figure tilted its head, observing her like a predator studies a cornered prey. And then it moved. Not fast, not hurriedly, but with deliberate, unstoppable motion. It was larger than she had imagined, and every step seemed to suck the warmth from the air. The sack bounced at its side, writhing like a living thing, and the small voices inside cried out in terror. No, don't, help. Mia swung the branch, desperate, hoping to strike something tangible. The red figure didn't flinch. Its eyes glimmered black, unbroken, untouchable. It spoke, voice hollow, echoing from every direction at once. You cannot strike me. I am the night, the snow, the fear, the list. The snow around them began to swirl unnaturally, forming shapes, faces, hands, twisted bodies of the children it had taken before. Their eyes pleaded, silent screams etched into the dark shapes that danced in the air. Mia's stomach lurched. She realized that attacking wouldn't stop it. Only one thing mattered: surviving, staying alive long enough to outsmart it. She ran, weaving between shadows and the twisted shapes, but the red figure advanced without haste. Its form seemed to flicker, appearing closer, then farther away, always in her line of sight. And then she tripped, tumbling into the snow, the cold searing her hands as she clawed herself upright. The sack loomed above her now, bulging violently. Tiny hands clawed outward, scraping against her legs, reaching for her, pulling her toward the shadow of the red figure. The whispers had become a deafening roar. "Join, join, join!" Mia screamed, her voice barely audible against the cacophony. She realized the only way to survive was to confront it directly. She forced herself to stand, clutching the branch like a weapon, her body trembling, teeth chattering. "You will not," she shouted, voice breaking, defiance rising despite her fear. The red figure tilted its head, amused, almost pleased. It extended one enormous hand toward her, claws glinting faintly in the moonlight. Its voice slithered into her mind. "You cannot fight the list it chooses, it claims." And then the unimaginable happened. The snow beneath Mia's feet began to shift, revealing a faint glow. She didn't understand it fully, but instinct told her to run toward it. A thin circle of light, faint but warm, appeared around her. The shadows shrieked, recoiling, the red figure's form flickering, uncertain for the first time. Mia dove into the light, clutching the branch. The sack writhed violently, the cries of the trapped children intensifying. The red figure howled, a sound that shook the night, echoing across the snow-covered street, rattling the trees and the walls of every house. The light burned brighter, pressing against the darkness, illuminating the red figure's monstrous form. "No, this cannot be." It hissed, black eyes narrowing, the shadows curling violently around it. Mia stumbled forward, tears freezing on her cheeks, but she kept moving. She could feel the threshold weakening, the power of the red figure flickering in the face of her defiance and the mysterious light. The whispers became panicked, fractured, desperate. "Stop! No, leave, chosen, not yet." And then, as suddenly as it had begun, the light expanded, consuming the shadows, the snow, the red figure itself. A deafening silence followed. The wind stopped. The snow lay undisturbed. The whispers faded into nothing. Mia collapsed into the snow, shivering violently. The red figure was gone. The sack lay still, empty, and the streets were silent once more. For a moment, she thought it was over. She had survived. She had defied the legend. But the truth gnawed at her. The list, it still existed. Somewhere, in some shadowed corner of the world, the red figure waited. Patient. Eternal. Watching. Choosing. Mia rose slowly, chest heaving, the snow melting from her frozen hands. She knew one thing for certain: Christmas would never be the same again. And somewhere, far away, the whispers waited, promising that the darkness was never truly gone. The list grows, the list never ends, and one day, you will hear it again. The first rays of dawn cut through the night sky, pale and fragile against the blanket of snow. The town was silent, unnaturally so, as though it had held its breath and only now was slowly exhaling. Icicles hung from rooftops, glittering in the early light, and the streets, once chaotic with shadows and whispers, were calm. Too calm. Mia stumbled through the snow-covered streets, numb from exhaustion, the adrenaline of the night still thrumming through her veins. She could see the town waking up slowly, windows opening, families emerging, the cheerful hum of Christmas morning, but it all felt unreal, like a scene she had walked into from someone else's memory. She stopped in front of her house. Her breath caught. The door was closed, as if nothing had happened. The stockings still hung along the mantel, filled with candy and toys. At first, relief flooded through her chest. Maybe it had been a dream. Maybe the red figure had been a figment of her imagination. But then she noticed it, the faint smear of black along the edge of the fireplace. A twisted imprint of claws, pressed into the hearth itself. Her stomach churned. The room smelled faintly of cold iron, like blood frozen in the snow. And then, a small, almost imperceptible whisper floated through the air. "I am always here." Mia froze. The blood ran cold in her veins. The town around her looked normal, peaceful, but she knew the truth. The red figure was patient. Eternal. Invisible to the world that refused to see it. It did not need to be everywhere at once, it could wait, and it would return. Across the town, other houses bore the same subtle signs, tiny claw marks, faint smears of black frost, the silent echo of something dragged across the snow. Children had woken to find their stockings full, yet empty in some inexplicable way. Gifts remained, but the air felt wrong. Cold. Watching. Mia turned away from her house, shivering violently. The sun was rising, but the warmth it promised could not reach her. Her eyes kept darting to the shadows, to the trees, to every corner where darkness lingered. She knew the red figure had claimed a presence in the night, in the snow, in the silence between heartbeats. A small crinkle in the snow behind her made her spin around. Nothing. Only footprints leading into the forest, massive, uneven, disappearing into the trees. And yet, her chest tightened. She could feel it, the unyielding, eternal gaze of the red figure, still choosing, still hunting. Mia's lips quivered. She knew she had survived the night, but she would never forget the cold eyes, the writhing sack, the whispers. The terror would stay with her forever, a shadow in the corner of her mind, waiting for the next Christmas Eve, for the next child who dared to watch, to wonder, to be curious. And as she turned to leave, the wind picked up, carrying a whisper just for her, faint but clear, curling around her ears like smoke. The list grows, and one day, it will call you again. Mia swallowed hard, staring at the snow, her heart still pounding. She knew the truth, some legends never die, and some darkness is eternal. The town smiled in the morning sun, unaware, untouched by what had passed. But the red figure waited, patient and hungry, for the next Christmas, for the next list, for the next child. And somewhere deep in the shadows, Mia knew it would always be there, just out of sight, just beyond the warmth of the world she knew. Because Christmas was never truly safe again.